Good morning. Welcome back to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at MarketSite is Stephen King. He's the founder and CEO of imbrex, and we're going to look at real estate as actually a data marketplace. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us over at MarketSite. Now, the question is a change really underway in the real estate industry, and how come it's happening so fast?
There's definitely a change coming, and it's coming fast because it's a necessary change. So when people think about real estate and how it's starting to digitize, they don't think of it in terms of standardization. And so by standardization, I mean there's no underlying foundation to connect all of these disparate systems that currently exist. And so if you think about real estate, it's the largest asset class in the world. And so you've had these empires build up around each other, but you haven't established a fundamental way for them all to talk to each other. And so, talking about blockchain, the blockchain for the first time gives us the ability to connect all these disparate networks in a very efficient way.
I read the piece in Forbes, and it was interesting that you pointed out that for 30 years, the real estate industry has been relatively stagnant. Would you say that the biggest weakness is perhaps the technology around it?
The technology has not been good, but for various reasons. And it's because everybody's building in individual silos.
Right.
And so because you don't have these silos talking to each other, you can't have an efficient way you can't have a efficient way for the real estate community to progress forward. And so what the blockchain really gives us the ability to do is to establish that communication layer. So we can lay that foundation so that later we can build on the transaction on things like tokenization. So some of the values that you've heard from blockchain probably over the last 9 months, it's a great point that we'll eventually get to, but first we have to lay those building blocks.
Right. So is this what imbrex is doing specifically, and how is this different than the more well-known MLS system?
So it's different in that, let me give you an example.
Right.
So back in 2012, I had a real estate firm, and I found it quite expensive to syndicate our listing data out to third-party applications like MLSs. And the reason for this was because my system didn't communicate with their systems, and their systems didn't communicate well with each other. And so what I realized was, back to what I just said, we have the largest asset class in the world that doesn't talk to each other. So the blockchain, what it can do is it can syndicate all these networks. So backtracking just a little bit. So in order to make the transaction more cost effective and more efficient for the individual, we can use these things called smart contracts on the blockchain, where a buyer and a seller and their respective parties can exchange documents in a very secure, transparent way. Now, in order to reach that point, first we have to find a way to establish that standard. And so we can do that standard by using things like the blockchain.
All right, and how are participants incentivized on the platform?
So participants are incentivized because you can basically package listing data, and then you can disseminate it and store it onto the blockchain. And through this process, it generates a key. So each individual or each firm can take that key, and now they can lend it out to other applications or to other participants without actually giving up control. So the blockchain is a way to store things on a public utility rather than a private organization like imbrex or like Google. So now I can loan my key to you, you can pull that data directly from the blockchain without actually having to host it. And so there's a lot of value to firms being able to exchange data with each other or MLSs without giving up control.
So it sounds like to me, to wrap up here, that standardization and trust really are the keys to this technology to move the industry going forward.
Precisely. Once we do that, then we can get into smart contracts and escrow and all the other fun things that come with it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us at MarketSite, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.